Fond Memories tells the story of Madalena, an old woman who lives by herself in a very small town forgotten by time, where no one has died in decades. Madalena and the remaining residents have a well-established routine that they perform religiously. In the morning, she makes bread, drinks coffee with her friend Antonio, goes to church, visits the locked cemetery, has lunch with all the people in town, and goes home to write a letter to her dead husband. Everything changes when Rita, a young photographer who travels alone, arrives in town. Rita raises questions and shakes up the lives of everyone, especially Madalena, who agrees to shelter her for a few days. As the days go by, Rita gets to know the people in town, and Madalena starts to accept her age, and that death is not something to be afraid of, but part of life. The entire film takes place in about 7 days. The routine of Madalena is introduced in a series of static shots that show her in different scenes throughout the fictitious town of Jutuumba. The same scenes and settings are repeated throughout the film as Madalena tries to keep up with her daily activities, but they start to get different as Rita becomes closer to Madalena and the other citizens. The presence of Rita is what moves the film and changes the duration of scenes that have been shown before, as well as introducing new moments and scenarios to each day the film takes place. Rita makes the conversations that the characters have much more engaging and not simply the same things they have been talking about every day for years, like the weather or their health issues. She makes Madalena snap out of the stalled life she has been living and rethink the way she relates to aging and death. Some days clearly take a longer time on screen, and all of that depends on how much Rita is connected to Madalena and the rest of the people. The cinematography done by Lucio Bonelli makes great use of techniques such as low light, camera movement, and shot sizes to visually represent the relationships of the characters with each other, and even of the audience with the characters. Fond Memories definitely shows how the use of low light can influence the way characters relate to each other and to the audience. The first shot of the film is a long one that starts with Madalena walking out of her bedroom carrying a lamp. Since the camera is stationed by a table that is far away, we have to wait for Madalena to walk all the way there. So she starts as this very small figure in the dark and grows as she gets closer, revealing not just more of herself, but of the place she lives in. The use of low light in the night scenes has an obvious reason in terms of making it realistic. The town of Jotumba is shown as a very recluse one, so they do not have electric power to light their homes. But the extensive use of low light coming from 1 or 2 old lamps at most also gives the film a very intimate look that is reflected on the relationships established. We usually only see 1 or 2 characters together while lit by those lamps. Since it's very low light, many times all we can see is the characters, and that brings us closer to them. Consequently, that brings them closer to each other. There's nothing else to see but them, not much of the place or objects around them. This low light makes us more intimate to the characters, while also keeping us literally in the dark sometimes, creating a sense of mystery that engages the audience to find out more about Madalena and the others. Most of the shots in Fond Memories are still, but the ones that employ camera movement are heavily influenced by Rita's presence in the film and represent visually the way she makes things move in the life of the townspeople. The first shot of the film that has camera movement only happens after 22 minutes, and even though it does not show Rita, it takes place only a couple shots before she's introduced. After that, the film does a great job relating the moving shots to Rita and visually representing the changes she brings to the story. For the rest of the time, the shots that have movement either have Rita in frame or are related to her somehow. Like the shot where Madalena goes into Rita's room and starts looking at the photos that she took. This careful use of camera movement, in contrast with an extensive use of stationary shots, is a perfect example of how a technique like this can be used to represent the monotony of some characters, and how that can change with the introduction of another character who literally sets everything in motion. In addition to the low light and camera movement, the sizes of the shots in each part of the film can also be related to the level of intimacy we have with the characters, and they have among themselves. A great example of how the distance the characters have from the camera can illustrate the audience's relationship with them is the scenes where Madalena and Antonio drink coffee outside of his shop. This scene is repeated a few times throughout the film, since it's an important part of Madalena's routine. The first and second time we watch the scene, it is pretty much the same. On a wider shot, Madalena and Antonio sit down outside and drink coffee. He talks about the weather and she talks about the pain on her bones. Then they stay quiet. The third time that the scene is repeated, and first time after Rita is introduced in the story, we see a closer shot. Still wide, but closer to the characters. This time they talk about the past and memories, and how they relate to those. A much more engaging and intimate conversation. On the fourth time we watch the same scene on a different day, the frame is even closer, showing both characters from the chest up. It is a very different shot in comparison with the first. We can actually see the details of their faces as they talk about death. Madalena says she's afraid of dying, and Antonio says he's not unhappy enough to die. The different sizes of shots and the distance between the audience and the characters in these scenes illustrate how this technique can influence our perspective of the people we see on the screen, and how a good use of close-ups versus wide shots is achieved when related to the level of intimacy and information the audience has acquired. The cinematography of Found Memories does an excellent job on conveying the progression of intimacy necessary to get to know the characters and relate to them. The use of low light forces us to concentrate on the characters in frame and not get distracted by unimportant things, while also being realistic with the simplicity of the town where the film takes place. The thoughtful use of movement related to Rita in contrast with the many still shots also helps us to understand her role as a character who really sets the story in movement and influences everything. The clever employment of close-ups to approximate the audience and characters throughout the film also reveals the effort to make the cinematography more and more relevant to the story it is telling. A story about the way we relate to time and our lives changing throughout the years, how we lose people on the way and the pain it provokes, how they still live in our memories and we will live in the memories of others, how ultimately we need to accept our end, and that it is the very aspect of life that makes it really worth living.